let's talk about India because Justin Trudeau seems really convinced that Modi had an assassination team basically come to Canada and assassinate a Canadian citizen who was, I guess, a critic of
a Sikh activist who supported an independent Sikh state.
And what happens with that? I've seen how we have backed down from MBS.
Right. Everyone has seen that. And Modi has seen that, importantly.
Well, that's basically what's going on, right? I mean, it's open season, it seems like.
I wish that weren't it, but it is. I mean, yesterday we saw a comment from Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, where he was asked about that. And he said, we support the investigation the Canadians are doing. Notably, the Biden administration has not endorsed the accusation. But Jake made a comment like, we support the investigation. You don't get some kind of special permit. I forget the word he actually used, but you don't get a special, permission to do this if you're an ally. And it's like, well, MBS might beg to differ on that because yes, after, everyone knows what Biden said on the campaign trail, we're going to make them a pariah. We're going to reassess this relationship. And we've all seen what's happened since then.
Which is absolutely none of that.
Absolutely none of that. So you do get special permission, apparently, to assassinate critics abroad if you're seen as necessary.
And MBS is still, even despite the fact that Biden sort of, I don't want to say bent the knee, but sort of bent the knee.
Bumped the fist.
Yes, bumped the fist.
Yeah, literally.
MBS still said, I'm going to make it, I'm going to shave a couple of percentage points off of your electoral chances by raising gas prices over the next year.
That's right.
What is the economic driver behind the efforts clearly by the Biden administration to deepen ties with Modi's government here?
Well, I think it's, they want to keep as many people on, Team America or close to Team America as they can. I mean, again, through the logic of strategic competition, the relationships themselves become valuable, regardless of who it's with.
Because you don't know when you'll need to call on it in the future for whatever circumstance.
Right.
But this seems to be a little bit problematic. This thing where there seems to be this sort of license to go and assassinate people wherever they want, because that seems to be able to metastasize. I mean, I am also recalling that, wasn't it Flynn was hired by Erdogan to get Gulen, a Turkish dissident,
Fethullah Gulen,
to kidnap him, and I guess Flynn just couldn't get his shit together. I guess, or I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but this seems like it's going to be problematic because how do you stop this? If you set up the paradigm that we've created in terms of our foreign relations and this idea that we're going to be in some form of competition with China, it means that essentially any of the major players that we perceive to be chess pieces within this, broader game have carte blanche to do, as long as they don't do something really, really big. Maybe you can't assassinate, maybe you can't kill 30 people. But maybe one at a time, you could get up into the teens.
If you want it to be 30 people, you have to be the United States, and they have to do it with flying robots.
Right.
Well, so what's an alternative paradigm?
Well, an alternative paradigm, first to recognize, listen, we have to work with imperfect and sometimes very bad governments. Let's understand the costs and risks that come with that. It's not the first time we've ever presented with these trade-offs. I mean, this was our policy during the Cold War. We're in a kind of, U.S. versus Soviet global competition, and we want to collect as many friends and allies and partners, and some of that are going to be really bad. And in fact, sometimes we're going to replace democratic governments that were pro-Soviet with really bad dictatorial repressive governments that'll be friends with us. I mean, Chile, we just passed the anniversary of that U.S.-backed coup, and that stuff may seem like it's working in the short term, but it really does come back to bite us in the longer term in a lot of ways. We're dealing right now in, just for example, Latin America. I mean, we're trying to rebuild a relationship with this region, in my view, possibly the most important, region for the United States to build partnerships for a lot of reasons. But the kind of deep distrust, entirely justified distrust of the United States because of the way we've treated this region is a real hindrance.
And we're seeing the implications of that in terms of like our long-term attempts to disintegrate the Venezuelan economy.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing it in terms of like our thwarting of democratic, any type of like democracy and functioning civil society in places like Honduras and
the election of leaders who are like have the cachet of being in opposition to what's perceived, like in Guatemala, what's perceived as like a corrupt right-wing kind of U.S. connected regime.
Well, let's talk about Biden's pact with Lula about worker rights. Like, is that the beginning of an attempt to? Because we no longer have the fear of like what happens if we get democratic socialist countries in Latin America. That's no longer a concern, really, is it?
Right. No, I think, having said all what I just said, I feel like they're, Biden's approach to Lula in particular, but others like Petro, like Boric in the region have actually been really good and admirable. I mean, if you look at the approach that Biden and his team took to the election last year. I mean, they had a lot of support from members of Congress, including from Bernie and Tim Kaine, who offered a resolution just supporting free and fair elections and saying we would the relationship between our countries would be threatened if there were any shenanigans, essentially. But at the same time, Biden was sending multiple folks down there, Secretary of Defense Austin, CIA Director Bill Burns, down there to talk to their counterparts and just make clear we want a free and fair election. They were not putting a thumb on the scale for either side. And again, the reason that Bernie was pressing this message with Biden as well is because we were in touch with a lot of Brazilian activists, and that is what they asked for. And I think that's kind of the key thing. We were hearing from Brazilian civil society and said, this is what we need from the United States of America. Support a free and fair election and recognize the results of that election as soon as they are clear. And that was the ask. That's what Biden did. They were on the phone with Lula a short time after that. Lula was in the White House just a few weeks after that. I mean, that is 180 degrees from Obama's treatment of Lula years ago.
And this is despite the fact that Lula has not necessarily been like supportive of our support of Ukraine and this and that. It's basically like we don't need their support for our foreign policy as much as we need stability from them and to sort of grow.
I think it's a really important recognition that this is an important and multifaceted relationship. So Lula does not have to sign on to, what we want him to say about Ukraine, for example. We would like if he talked about it in a different way, but we're not going to determine the relationship based on that. So I think this meeting they did the other day, a joint partnership defending labor rights is huge. This is a very big deal. I mean, they're already working on climate issues together. I was down in Brazil in the summer talking to some of Lula's people. I mean, they are going all in behind a green transition. They are really betting his presidency on that in a lot of ways in terms of preserving the Amazon, in terms of building, creating new jobs, supporting labor rights, all with the goal of moving away from fossil fuels. And so I think this cuts across so many issues that
is it the material implications of these agreements, or is it just the idea that we're trying to sort of reorient our relationship with that whole region and to be supportive instead of like disruptive? A and B, is there any impetus within Congress or in the foreign policy establishment to actually start to provide the type of aid that we've provided to places like, I don't know, to Egypt and Israel for that matter, like to grow that and see if there is, have we so destroyed civil institutions in many of these countries over the course of decades of interfering and inhibiting, sort of like the growth of these institutions that we could pour money in there, but it's not going to be utilized in the way that it should be.
I mean, to answer your first question, I think for now that partnership is, hazy on the details, but I think it's important as a rhetorical matter to see Biden and Lula sitting together talking about this and lifting up the importance of labor, especially as we're seeing multiple
Right.
strikes here in the United States. I think that's a very big deal, and and that is an area where I think Biden and Lula really do have a meeting of the minds and a meeting of the priorities. A second thing to note here, I don't think we're quite there yet where we're going to see the kind of aid coming from Congress, giving what Congress's priorities, but I also think it's worth noting we haven't seen, I mean, the concern from someone like, from Obama, why he kind of kept Lula at arm's length was a fear of the political costs domestically, of being seen as too close to a left-wing leader. Biden's experienced none of those costs, right?
Yeah, what?
I think we saw a few cranky tweets from Marco Rubio. That's it.
Yeah, who cares?
What this has shown, and again, I think this is where the left deserves credit. I mean, the left has shown that, it can provide cover and political space for Biden to have a better policy toward this
Also,
region.
to be fair, the Republicans get distracted by Dr. Seuss at this point.
Yeah.
Like literally.
Right, so let's use that.
Well, this is why they should be moving more towards a broader relationship with Venezuela. That might help a little bit in like our dependence on something like Middle Eastern oil.
Right.
That would be is that a step that you think that they would realistically take?
I don't think they're there yet, but you're totally right. But I
Well,
think
we don't really have a dependence on Middle East oil as much as we don't want China to have a deeper relationship with
Right.
Middle Eastern
But they're
oil.
already doing that with Saudi Arabia.
They're doing it, but they don't. That seems to be like we could make up the other 10% of oil that we get. I mean, and granted, it affects international prices.
right, that's the key thing.
if
They
we
can
were to-
turn a crank and raise the prices.
Yes,
Yeah.
although we could nationalize some stuff
Yeah.
maybe, and we could fix that in a day.
All
seems
right.
to me. But the real issue I think is, ultimately is that we want Saudi Arabia to continue to play both sides because we don't want to play just Chinese
One
sides.
side. Yeah.